Okay, today in Art 1, we made a 12-part piece of paper that is demonstrating a lot of different watercolor skills. I assume if you're watching this video, it's because you were absent and you need to make up this assignment. The materials you need for this assignment are, first, you need a 9x12 piece of watercolor paper. Remember, it's the thicker paper that has more of a grit or a texture to it than our regular drawing paper. You also need watercolors, okay? These are brand new watercolors, and you can see this one has already been contaminated a little bit. Oops, sorry. And what I mean by that is that somebody has already mixed a little bit of green in with that yellow. And oh my gosh, look at this white. That's horrible, okay? Guys, we have to take care of our supplies. Otherwise, we're not going to have nice new supplies anymore because we can't take care of them. Other supplies you'll need is some rubbing alcohol. And I can give you a little plate with some rubbing alcohol. This plate has a little bit of salt on it, which you can barely see because you don't need much at all. You need a water cup with clean water, a clean paintbrush, a writing utensil, a Q-tip, and an oil pastel, preferably white. Let me get my little setup. Okay. So on your paper, you're going to divide it into 12 parts. This doesn't have to be super neat and pretty. It just needs to be approximate. So I do a line going horizontally, a line going vertically, and then section these off into thirds. So 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Okay, and in your individual rectangles, you're going to label the first one as flat wash. Second is gradient wash. The third one is variegated, V-A-R-I-E-G-A-T-E-D. Wash, glazing, dry brush, wet in wet, and then the second row is dropping in, lift off, salt, alcohol, resist, and splatter. And also in this bottom right corner, put your first and last name. Okay? So watercolor is just like it sounds. You are painting with water. So one important thing to do before you paint sometimes is to prep your watercolor paper, and you simply do that by painting it with clean water. Okay, and what this does is it gets the paper wet and it's like it's primed and ready for you to paint on. If you certainly can start painting without priming your paper, but you'll see that your watercolor will flow more smoothly if you've prepped your paper. So the first thing you're going to do is a flat wash, and you can pick any color. I'm going to pick this yellow and try to clean some of this nasty green out. And with a flat wash, you're just going to use these kind of back and forth strokes. And your goal is for it to be an even amount of pigment from top to bottom. Okay? Make sure you are cleaning your brush really good with your water in between, because again, you don't want to cross-contaminate and, you know, accidentally put orange into yellow or blue into orange or something like that. For gradient wash, we've talked about gradients before, and how they flow from kind of like dark to light. I'm not going to prime my paper this time, and you'll be able to see that my brush just dries out a little quicker than if I had primed my paper with water. So a gradient wash, you're trying to flow from dark to light, or more pigment to less pigment. And if you want less pigment, you'll just need to add more water. And if you want more pigment, you will add more paint. Remember, pigment is just a fancy word for color. So I'm not really a big fan of how much water is down here, so I'm just going to use my paper towel and blot and just kind of dry some of it up. Watercolor is really forgiving, which is nice, because see, now I can go in and I have a much smoother gradient from dark to light. Okay, variegated wash is similar to a gradient wash, except you're flowing from one color to the next color to the next color. So what I like to do is start with yellow in the middle. Okay, and one thing you have to beware with your variegated washes is the two colors that you're mixing. So for example, yellow and purple or violet are opposites on the color wheel. This means they're complementary colors, and if I mix them together, they're gonna create kind of a brown, just blah, kind of a poopy color. Alright, so if you're not wanting poopy brown on your painting, then don't mix complementary colors or colors that are opposite on the color wheel. If I'm wanting perhaps say a nice sunset, I can flow from orange to yellow. And you're just trying to get a really gradual gradient or flow from one color to the next. Oops, I forgot to say something at the beginning of the video. We need a flat wash on glazing and liftoff. I'm gonna prep or prime my paper for gradient and liftoff. So go ahead, or not gradient, glazing and liftoff. Go ahead and give me a flat wash for glazing. And a flat wash for liftoff. Okay, we're gonna let those two dry. We'll come back to them. Alrighty, dry brush is exactly that. You want to dry your brush to where there is little to no water on your paper towel. And then you're going to pick a color that is already wet, but is not real soupy. Like my purple is looking pretty soupy, but this green is looking you know, it's wet, it kind of makes a sticky noise. Okay, and then I'm just going to use this dry brush effect on my paper. In class, we talked about some applications for dry brush. Maybe you're trying to do leaves on trees, or a dog's fur, or tree bark, or some kind of texture. Dry brush is a really good method to get some texture. So once you've done like a layer of your painting, you can let it dry and then put some dry brush on top of it, and that'll help give it some texture. Okay, wet in wet. If I can slide over. You kind of need to work fairly quickly. So if I do my flat wash in magenta, I don't want that magenta to dry. I want to wash my brush out quickly. Pick my second color. Typically, it's better to go darker with your second color than lighter color, and paint on top of it wet in wet. And so you'll notice over time it's going to bleed, and the two colors are going to kind of like run into one another. We don't really have a lot of control on how that bleeds and spreads. So if you're looking for like a really precise line in your painting, then wet and wet is probably not the type of method you're going to want to use. This is for if you're wanting like even kind of a spiky texture or something like that. Okay, dropping in. This is another one that you kind of need to work fairly quickly. You can prep or prime your paper. That basically keeps your paper wetter longer, so you have more time to work with. So if I do a red flat wash, and then for this one, you do want a soupy color. So I'm going to try to drop some water into this blue to make it really soupy and wet. Okay. And then you're just going to like dab. You can kind of tap your brush and try to get it to fall on its own. But if it's not soupy enough, that's okay. You can just touch the area that you want to drop in. And again, it gives like a spiky sort of texture. The two colors are going to run together. You can see over here like it's running and spreading up and down even now. So again, if you're needing like a really precise line, or you're looking for precision in what you're doing, dropping in may not be what you need for that specific scenario. Lift off is still drying, so we'll come back to it in glazing. Salt, again, you need a very tiny amount of salt, like a pinch, for what we're doing. Can you see that? Yeah. For salt, I would prep with water so that your paper will stay wetter longer. And then salt works better with darker colors, or you're just going to be able to see the effect more with darker colors. So I've got my violet. Violet, you're turning violet. If you know what that quote, that movie is from. I am proud of you. If you don't know, it's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Okay, and before your paint dries, you want to get that pinch of salt and sprinkle it on top of your paint. There's kind of a glare from the ceiling light. There you can see a little better. And you can see that salt soaks up some of the water and the pigment, and the longer that it sits, the more of the effect it'll have. And so that's why you want it to have a lot of water. That's why I would suggest priming your paper before that method. Alcohol. You're going to do a flat wash again. Okay, and you should have a plate with some alcohol on it. You're just gonna dip your Q-tip. I have the bottle. Dip your Q-tip and just dab onto your paper. And the alcohol makes the paint kind of scurry away from it. Okay. Next is resist, which you'll need your white oil pastel for. So in the resist box, just give me a little squiggle. And we know that oil and water do not mix well together. So when we paint on top of our oil pastel with watercolor, it's going to resist the water because we put oil down first. So look at dropping in now. You can see how that has spread. You can see how wet and wet has also spread. You can see like the brown of the variegated wash more clearly now. And so, you know, watercolor will continue to change even after you've quote unquote finished while your paper dries. So just beware of that as well. So lastly, splatter. For splatter, you need to get your paint pretty soupy. And you're not going to do this motion, okay? We're not at a rock concert. And you've also got to be aware that there are people sitting at the table near you. So if you are splattering your painting and the other people at your table are not, it might be polite for you to step away from your table, go to the side near one of the sinks, and just be super considerate that you're not the only person in this class. But what you're going to do is load your brush, make sure your paint is really soupy, and then you're just going to kind of flick it with your finger. Okay, it can get messy, so you can tear strips of paper. Like if I didn't want any blue to touch over here, it might be wise for me to cover this with a piece of newspaper. We have plenty of newspaper Oops, touched it on the paper. But you can create this splatter paint effect by running your finger over the bristles, okay? It gets your finger dirty, you're fine, you'll live, okay? It's not the end of the world. Oops. And now let's come back to glazing. So glazing is basically putting one color or hue on top of another color or hue. So we're still going to be able to see some of the blue underneath whatever we put on top. So for example, if I put yellow on top, it's going to change my hue into kind of a green, but you're still going to be able to see the blue underneath it. So glazing is just layering colors on top of one another. And then lift off. Let's say you painted an area too dark, it's got too much pigment on it, or it's the wrong color or something like that. There is a certain element of erasing with watercolor. So with a totally totally clean brush, you are going to, it's like you're scrubbing the paper with your paintbrush. Just the area that you want to remove the pigment. And then with your paper towel, you will soak up the water. Okay? And then you can wash your brush again and scrub some more. Obviously, don't scrub your paper so much that you start to rub a hole in it. That would be no bueno. But look how much lighter my paper is here, you know, compared to where it was. I did, like, the fibers of the paper are starting to, like, kind of scuff up, so I would need to stop there. If I keep going and keep going, I'm going to start rubbing a hole in my paper. And that is the 12 little mini workshops we did today on watercolor.